Okay, Matthew. Now, um, Jose Ramon, I hope that's correct pronunciation of his surname. He says, are the decentralized spaces of the democratization of betting exchanges, automated market makers, and prediction markets a serious threat to the traditional industry that also faces rigid compliance updates?
So, in do I think, I suppose, broadly speaking, do I think that the traditional bookmaking industry is under serious threat by anything? I would say no. Generally, I would say the only threat that the bookmaking industry feels it's under is increased conformity around, problem gambling and these kind of things, and legislation and legalization in different jurisdictions. I think the lawyers do more of the hard work in bookmakers now than almost anyone else. But yes, trying to sort of take this piece by piece. So decentralized spaces, I don't know how many really effective decentralized betting exchanges there are. For me, I think of basically betting as something where centralization works in terms of managing fixtures, resulting, all these kind of things. So, decentralization in terms of from the crypto space is a very popular theme at the moment. But I think decentralizing your exchange, I think, to be honest, having a tyrant at the top, making sure things run smoothly from the fixtures, management, start times, grading, all these other things, I actually think you kind of need the central authority on that. Democratization of betting exchanges, I guess democratization in the sense that anyone can have, everyone's on a level playing field, I guess, no account closures or restrictions. That I hope that some of that, I always hope that some of that comes into, I genuinely believe that, setting market limits by the event rather than by individuals and restricting them I think is just wrong, and it doesn't even optimize your earning potential. So I hope some of that democratization filters into bookmaking at some point, but at the same time, betting exchanges, it only feels like everyone's getting a great deal if there's sufficient money on the exchanges to bet with automated market makers and prediction markets. There's been various predictions, predict it for the sort of the political betting markets. So they sort of tend to get to a certain point and then peter out, as there's only so many people that you can get interested in it as being a thing. Exchanges really, Betfair grew, had good growth numbers, and then hit this point where it became increasingly hard to attract new people to the concept, I suppose. Automated market makers, to be honest, I think some of the automated market makers will find themselves trying to get into the traditional industry more than wait for everyone to embrace decentralized spaces of the democratization of betting exchanges. But yeah, do I think they're a threat? It doesn't look that way to me currently, but I've been wrong many times.
Okay, now Kieran would like to know, how do bookies price in-play markets like team shots and shots on target?
So I think generally everything has an expectation that you start before the match goes live. So you'll have an expected goals and expected shots generally that's associated with that expected goals, expected shots on target that's associated with that, corners, etc. You're simply breaking the match up into chunks. I think once upon a time, a long time ago, the chunks were 5-minute chunks. Now they're much more granular. 5 minute. Now we have 5-minute speed betting markets, so you'd have to break that down into more chunks. You can just have one price for 5 minutes. So I think once you chopped it down into little pieces, you find out what the expected goals, shots, corners, etc., are within that little chunk, and then as the game evolves, you may adjust your original expectancies. So if you see a lot of shots, you might increase the shot expectancy from the start that then filters all the way down the timeline. So now you have increased expectancy across all the little chunks. And yeah, those expectancies will have probability distributions, and those probability distributions will set your under over, 50-50 lines. Yeah, when you're modeling out these things, you've got the time vector and you've got the inputs, and yeah, a lot of it's just time decay and twiddling the initial inputs to mean that what you twiddle at the initial part filters through all the way through the game as it goes. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered that very well.
Well, you could maybe elaborate there. This is Noleg. This is could you explain the actual logistics of building an HR model in terms of input? All the inputs you've heard of put into an HR algo, how many, what's too much, giving them weight, deciding how heavily to weight them, and so on, until it starts spitting out a tissue that could win. Lots in there, I know.
Possibly, again, another plug, really, I suppose, for someone else. But if you look at the Smarter Sig website, Mark Littlewood there, he has actually built a piece of software, which is sort of a My Sports AI, I think. And you can see the list of, if you look at his blog, and some videos, you can see the list of inputs he has there. Huge number of inputs. Because when let's say you take something like trainer form, and let's say your trainer form is just the win percentage of runners. Well, there's trainer form for the last 3 days, last 5 days, parameter optimization, as it might be called, input parameter optimization, is its own field before you even then model how those inputs generate outputs, in a sense. So there's no limit to the number of inputs. I think probably you can get, normally costs like some stupid amount on Amazon, but I think I get an ebook of, is it CX Wong, I think, who wrote basically Bentner's initial machine learning sort of exercise for horse racing. And people always say that it's formatted terribly and the English barely makes any sense. But anyway, the answer is logistics of building an HR model in terms of input, just every piece of data you can get your hands on, and not only every piece of data, but then splitting that data into every different time frame, every different, you can have the actual metric, you can have its Z-score, so you can have its number of standard deviations above or below the average. You can have that then distributed by a number of previous races, previous time, because there's races back, and then there's time back, which are two different things, particularly for horse racing. How, so it's how many, just so many. What's too much? I think in terms of when you're starting, there's probably nothing is too much, but I think you do get this situation whereby you'll have one or two factors that are massively important. So let's say you have one that's just horse rating, and then trainer rating, jockey rating, blah, 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 all these other things. It may be that what will happen is you'll build a model and it will tell you, do you know what, how good the horse is pretty much where it's at. And the reality is that you can then sort of split the models. So what you can do is you can then take all the factors that aren't the horse's ability, and then you can train a model to find out, well, if we ignore the horse, what's the most important factors from here? And I remember somewhere reading that someone said above 5 factors for prediction, you're just sort of adding noise. So what you may boil it down to might be very limited in the end. But machine learning is certainly not my area of expertise. Giving them weight, you've got to let XG boost, something like that. You've got to let something like that decide how much weight to give them, and then. So I'm just reading the question again. Giving them weight, deciding how heavily to weigh them, and so until it starts spitting out a tissue that could win. Well, again, I would probably direct them to Mark Littlewood, who I think is at Smarter Sig on Twitter. He's someone who's been betting almost exclusively to bet for SP, I think, algorithmically using large machine learning data sets in horse racing for many, many years now. Bets a huge volume, hundreds of bets a day. And he will probably tell you more about that than I could. But I definitely know that building these models can be done, is done. People are making money using them, and generally more is more when it comes to initial investigation. But after initial investigation, it does tend to boil down to a much slimmer model I have experienced.
And the next couple of questions probably sort of tie in together, so I'll give them to you both. Does Matthew think that Betfair will remain the main exchange in 10 years' time? And also, that's from Dennis O'Kelly. And Michael Verity would like to know your predictions for the betting landscape, how they will look in 5 to 10 years. So I'll lump them in together.
Okay, will Betfair remain the main exchange in 10 years' time? Very likely, if it exists. So I can never, at this point, right now, to maintain the exchange costs, a good amount of money. I never know if ever Flutter Group would decide it was worth pulling the plug on because they wanted to spend. I mean, they seem to have just near infinite money. I mean, they bought SNAI recently, one of the largest Italian bookmakers. So, they maybe they can just afford to run it just as long as it's making some money indefinitely. But yeah, if it's around, I think it will still most likely in the UK be the dominant exchange. What evolves possibly in America, etc., I don't know. But the only thing that seems like the Magic Book project has stalled. Smarkets, I don't feel like it's directed its attention. Jason Tross seems to want to focus on America. They feel to have sort of plateaued a little bit in my mind in terms of liquidity and sort of critical mass. The interesting one is BetDAC. I mean, BetDAC has gone back into the hands of Dermot Desmond, I think, after he's got this contract to buy it back off Entain and for £1 or something, and I think he has done so. Obviously a very wealthy man, very smart man. Can he resurrect BetDAC? Or I say resurrect, that implies it was ever the one at any point, but can he make it really kick on? I think it requires so much, like really good management team, really good tech team. Like you have to put the kind of team together that would be so good at just launching something that makes money better, just another bookmaker even, that it would be like, is this worth the return I'm getting by investing in this? So I don't know. And then where do I see the exchange in 5 to 10 years' time? Well, so we're going through the great consolidation at the moment where legal and data costs are so large that it makes more sense to basically all bind together. So, the Flutter groups, the Entains, etc. I think once we've gone through that incredible, it seems, I say this because it seems to be the pattern across all industries, that after you go through a period of mass sort of merger and acquisition, people then step back after a point and say, right, so now we know what the general beige middle point is. Where do I want to position myself to be sort of the alternative option? So I think I would say over the next 5 years, certainly, it's going to just get more and more homogenized. And if you can imagine that, more and more people will just get bought up and brought into bigger and bigger groups. And then we'll see some bounce back after that. So maybe in 5 years' time, we'll start to see, like a lot of people are thinking this time is now. I don't think the time is now for these alternative groups to really grab traction. I think the alternative time will be a more settled American market, a more legally well-organized European market. Maybe India has opened up. Maybe China, I say China. India definitely would, I think, within 5 years' time be opened up. Brazil's opening up. At that point, I think something would be like, okay, so we know what the general does it quite well thing is. Now, what's the alternative challenger idea to this? So I would hope long time to wait, Michael, I'm afraid, but I hope in 5 years' time we might start to see some things that genuinely are like, oh, let's try doing it this way instead of the way we've always been doing it.
Okay, right. The last few minutes is Andrew Yates. You've already explained why you stopped doing the Inside Betting podcast, but is it still possible to access them anywhere?
I believe there is, and I'm not. Someone actually said to me, "You do realise that these podcasts are still available?" And that's absolutely fine. I took down my Anchor account, which is what I used for doing my podcasts. But yeah, if you can find them out there, someone even, I think, maybe even replied to one of your tweets, I think, with the link to it. But yeah, there definitely is places out there where they exist. And enjoy. If you please just whatever you do, please don't come back to me in years' time and say you were really off on this, because that will drive me mad.
Okay, right. Just the last two from our first question poser, Fergie. I want to know what your current role in the industry is.
Current role in the industry is wearing a few hats at the moment, but I work for a group that's aspiring to build trading tools for bookmakers that will facilitate better market making style decisions and risk management decisions that don't involve restricting and closing customers. So people call this model various different things, but the idea is that we will try and empower bookmakers, I guess, with ways to do that bookmaking instead of the cut and shut. Try and monetize all customers and treat all customers equally for a better end result. And so within that, I'm wearing a lot of hats, as I say, but looking at how to build the software and what's the best way to do it.
Okay, and
that's what I find myself doing at the moment.
Okay, and finally, it's a bit of a tricky one, because I'm sure you don't want to actually give it out on this, but he wants to know if you have an email or contact, and would you be willing to share that for questions from other traders?
I found that the most successful way to keep in contact with people has actually been LinkedIn. I get an awful lot of international business trade owners looking at me on LinkedIn. I assume that I know that a lot of people don't want to disclose who they are on a LinkedIn account, but I have had people who've had fake names on LinkedIn then direct message me and say, oh, by the way, my name's this. I was wondering if you would mind talking about blah, blah, blah. And I'm open to that. Like I say, so that does seem to still be the best avenue to get in contact with me if you don't already have my mobile number. But yeah, not a huge fan of probably giving out an email address at this point.
Okay, well, you've given us an hour of your time, Matthew. So that's the end of that. I very much appreciate your added input there. And thanks to everybody that posed questions. So Matthew Trenhaile, thank you very much.
Thank you.